Jessica Hart zipped up her carry-on and took one last glance around the small, tidy apartment she had called home for the past 5 years in Chicago. Vacation had been a rare luxury this year, a week away from deadlines, emails, and endless client calls. She and her best friend, Lily, had been planning this getaway for months, a trip to the Pacific Northwest, a chance to breathe in the ocean air, walk among towering evergreens, and most importantly, escape the constant hum of city life. The ride to O'Hare International Airport had been uneventful, save for the usual traffic jam that made Jessica mutter under her breath, gripping the steering wheel with the kind of mild irritation she tried to avoid but somehow always succumbed to. The city skyline disappeared behind her as she and Lily navigated the familiar highway. Their conversation was light, filled with jokes about the flight, the hotels, and the inevitable tourist mishaps they were bound to encounter. Lily laughed, tossing a bag of snacks onto Jessica's lap. "If we survive the TSA this time without leaving half our belongings behind, it'll be a miracle," she teased. Jessica smiled, letting the tension of work fade from her shoulders. She had spent the morning meticulously packing, checking and double-checking, ensuring that she didn't forget her camera, her travel journal, or the small, worn paperback she carried wherever she went. She didn't usually worry about airplanes. Flights had always been routine, nothing more than a way to get from one place to another. The thought of danger in the air had never crossed her mind, at least not seriously. Once at the airport, the usual bustle surrounded them. Families struggling with oversized luggage, business travelers marching through with headphones and tablets, and airport staff hurrying along the polished floors. Jessica and Lily maneuvered through security, laughing at the occasional mishaps. A mother trying to corral 3 children while juggling multiple carry-ons. A man cursing softly at his laptop battery dying mid-screening. A couple arguing over whose turn it was to take off shoes. Life was ordinary, mundane, predictable, and Jessica liked it that way. Finally, they approached the gate for Flight 227. The Boeing 737 sat like a sleek metal bird, its engines humming softly even as passengers lined up. Jessica's stomach fluttered with the familiar, trivial anxiety that always accompanied air travel. The minor unease of sitting so high above the ground, the impatience for takeoff, the excitement of somewhere new. She barely noticed the flight attendants standing at the door, smiling, professional, almost like statues in their crisp uniforms. "Boarding now," a voice announced. The crowd shifted forward and Jessica adjusted her backpack. She felt a strange calm, almost meditative, as she took her seat near the window. From here, she could see the runway stretching out like a ribbon into the distance, planes taxiing to the end, engines roaring to life. Lily settled into the aisle seat beside her, pulling out a magazine and a small bottle of water. As the flight attendants went through their safety demonstrations, Jessica listened out of habit, nodding occasionally, but her mind wandered to the forests and coastal cliffs she would see in a few hours. The safety video ended, the seatbelt signs blinked on, and the plane began to taxi. She felt the vibration through her feet, the anticipation of liftoff, and a rush of thrill mingled with nerves. Lily gripped her hand briefly. "We're really doing this," she whispered. Jessica smiled. "Yes, we are." Then, as the plane gained speed on the runway, an unremarkable moment became unforgettable. The engines roared, stronger than she expected, and the plane lifted off, tilting slightly as it climbed into the gray morning sky. Jessica pressed her hands to the armrest, marveling at how small the city appeared from above, the streets a mere web, the buildings flattened. She felt that fleeting sense of freedom travelers always did, the detachment from the familiar, the world below moving without her. Everything seemed ordinary, everything seemed safe. But then came the first shudder. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the cabin. Jessica blinked, thinking it must be the turbulence that occasionally rattled flights over the Midwest. A stewardess passing through the aisle steadied herself with the overhead panel, her practiced smile unwavering. "Just a little bump," she said softly to a nervous-looking passenger. Jessica relaxed, assuming it was nothing. The shudder returned, stronger this time, followed by a low groan from the engines. Drinks on the fold-out trays sloshed dangerously, some tipping over completely, leaving sticky puddles on tray tables. Jessica's stomach clenched. She glanced at Lily, who was staring at the window, her brows knit in worry. The plane tilted slightly to the right, and the familiar hum of the engine sounded strained, off-kilter. A voice came over the intercom, calm but tinged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Turbulence. She had flown countless times before. This didn't feel like turbulence. There was a rigid, unnatural vibration, a sense that the plane was resisting something far beyond the ordinary. Her fingers dug into the armrest. Around her, passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some smiling nervously, others silently muttering prayers. A sudden lurch sent a tray of food crashing to the floor. A child screamed. Jessica instinctively reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it tightly. "It's just a rough patch," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as Lily. But deep down, something primal told her it was. The plane shuddered again, violently this time. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, startling everyone into panic. Jessica yanked one down, fumbling to put it over her face, struggling to secure the straps. The flight attendant's calm demeanor wavered as she tried to help a passenger struggling with his mask. Jessica's knuckles were white, heart hammering in her chest like a drum. From the cockpit came a strained voice, barely audible over the roar of engines and cries from the cabin. "We're experiencing a mechanical issue, trying to stabilize." Jessica froze. Her stomach dropped. Mechanical issue. The words were enough to shatter the fragile sense of safety that had surrounded her since boarding. Around her, the hum of nervous energy grew, passengers whispering prayers, gripping hands, holding children close. The sunlight outside no longer seemed comforting. It was pale, cold, and distant. Another violent lurch sent Jessica sliding in her seat, her chest pressing painfully against the armrest. Drinks spilled, bags toppled, and the intercom cut in and out, giving brief, fragmented warnings. The flight attendants tried to calm everyone, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the engines, the shouts, and the panic that had begun to spread like wildfire. Jessica looked at Lily. Her friend's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, hands gripping the armrest as if she could physically hold the plane steady. "We'll be okay," Jessica said, her own voice trembling despite her attempt at reassurance. "We'll be okay." But even as she said it, Jessica knew the words were a fragile lie. The plane jolted again, throwing her slightly against her seatbelt. The cabin went silent for a heartbeat. Then everyone screamed as the plane dipped unexpectedly. A wave of terror washed over her. She gripped the armrest, knuckles tight, staring out at the clouds rushing by at an alarming speed. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. This was no ordinary flight. Something was wrong, something terrible. And as the engines groaned and the plane shivered violently once more, Jessica realized with a chilling clarity that her life, and everyone else's on Flight 227, was about to change forever. The violent shuddering of Flight 227 rattled Jessica to her core. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the armrest, heart hammering in her chest. The cabin lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the faces around her, faces twisted in panic, fear, disbelief. The low hum of the engines had shifted into a terrifying, irregular roar. Something inside Jessica screamed that this was not ordinary turbulence. Across the aisle, a young mother clutched her toddler tightly, rocking him as he wailed in terror. Behind them, a businessman prayed silently, fingers intertwined, eyes closed, lips moving rapidly. Children screamed, some sobbing uncontrollably, while adults tried desperately to calm them, whispering words that even they didn't believe. The smell of spilled drinks and fear mingled in the air, a pungent, nauseating reminder of the fragility of life. Jessica's gaze flicked to the overhead bins, which rattled ominously as the plane pitched sharply to the left. A bag slid from the shelf, narrowly missing a man in the next row. A tray of half-finished food tumbled to the floor, splattering drinks and snacks across the aisle. The stewardess hurried to collect it, trying to maintain composure, but the tremor of her hands betrayed her inner panic. From the cockpit, a voice crackled over the intercom, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unexpected mechanical difficulties. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are assessing the situation." Jessica's stomach sank. "Mechanical difficulties," she whispered, her throat tight. Lily's hand squeezed hers. "It's okay, right?" she asked, voice trembling. Jessica wanted to reassure her, to say something, anything that would make it feel safe, but deep down she knew the words would be empty. Another violent jolt threw Jessica forward in her seat. Her oxygen mask slipped slightly, and she fought to readjust it. The plane tilted again, more violently this time, throwing luggage from the overhead bins and sending passengers' arms flailing. A scream tore through the cabin as the lights flickered once more, plunging everyone into momentary darkness. Jessica's heart raced. This wasn't just turbulence. It was something far more sinister, something out of her control. The plane's angle shifted dangerously, the nose dipping slightly. A low, metallic groan echoed through the fuselage as the engine struggled to maintain stability. A voice rose above the chaos, a passenger shouting urgently toward the front of the cabin. "Is there anyone here who knows how to fly a plane? Anyone at all?" Jessica froze. Her mind spun. She had flown a simulator once years ago on a whim in a game-like setting. It had been fun, a fleeting thrill, a novelty. But now, staring at the faces of terrified strangers, feeling the plane lurch violently under her, she realized that knowledge, however rudimentary, might be the only thing between life and death. Her best friend's grip on her hand tightened. What are you thinking?" Lily asked, eyes wide, voice shaking. Jessica swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. I might be able to help," she said, her voice trembling. I've done some flying simulations. It's not much, but..." The plane shuddered violently again, cutting her off. The overhead bins rattled and popped open as the plane tilted sharply to the right. Jessica clung to her seat, fighting to suppress the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel the acceleration pressing against her chest as gravity seemed to distort in ways that made every movement terrifyingly unpredictable. From the cockpit came another strained voice, barely audible above the roar of the engines. "We can't stabilize the aircraft, losing control." Jessica's stomach dropped. The words echoed in her mind like a hammer striking metal, losing control. The cabin erupted in screams, a chaotic symphony of fear. A man across the aisle vomited onto the floor. A mother pressed her face to her child, whispering prayers that went unanswered. The stewardess tried to maintain order, but it was futile. The plane bucked violently again, almost tipping to one side, and a collective gasp rose from the passengers. Jessica's hands shook as she considered the impossible. She could remain a terrified passenger, clinging to her seat, waiting for the inevitable. Or she could act. If no one else can control this plane, maybe I have to try. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the adrenaline surging through her veins. Every instinct screamed danger, but a strange clarity cut through the panic. She remembered the diagrams from the safety card in her seat pocket, the sections on cockpit procedures, on flight controls, on emergency protocols. She had ignored them countless times, but now every line of information felt vital, precious. Jessica rose from her seat, heart hammering, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of fellow passengers. I can help," she said, voice trembling but firm. All conversation ceased. The plane tilted again, violently, forcing passengers against their seatbelts. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums, and the hum of panic filled every inch of the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, hoarse, strained, nearly breaking. "If anyone on board has flight experience, now is the time." Jessica felt the weight of those words press down on her like a physical force. She knew it was absurd. She wasn't a pilot. She had never flown a real plane. but adrenaline sharpened her focus, cutting through fear. She crawled toward the cockpit, navigating overturned trays and panicked passengers, her every movement a battle against chaos. The co-pilot looked up as she approached, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Are you serious?" he asked, voice trembling. Jessica nodded, swallowing her panic. I can try," she said. "I've flown simulators before. I know some basics. Please let me try." The captain's eyes were wide, a mixture of desperation, disbelief, and hope. He swallowed, nodding slowly. "All right, you have to try. God help us all." Jessica's hands trembled as she entered the cockpit. The controls were complex, intimidating, every lever, button, and dial foreign to her. The plane shuddered again, alarms blaring as the aircraft tilted dangerously. She could hear the passengers screaming behind her, crying, holding onto each other as if their combined grip could somehow anchor them to safety. The co-pilot's voice was tense, rapid fire. "Adjust the throttle, stabilize the rudder. We're losing altitude fast." Jessica nodded, heart pounding, trying to process the information. She remembered the basic simulator lessons: flaps, trim, airspeed. She moved the controls tentatively, unsure but determined. The plane lurched violently, almost throwing her against the cockpit walls. Sweat streamed down her face. She could hear Lily's voice from behind her, calling out encouragement, a lifeline of human connection amidst the chaos. Jessica took a deep breath. The engines groaned, the plane tilting dangerously again. Outside, clouds whipped past like furious ghosts, sunlight filtering through in harsh, irregular bursts. She had to focus. One wrong move could end everything. And then, in the midst of screaming passengers, flickering lights, and the roar of failing engines, Jessica caught sight of it. The horizon was closer than it should have been. Mountains rose ahead like jagged teeth, uncomfortably near, demanding action. Her stomach lurched. The plane was descending too quickly, too fast. She had to act. Every second was critical. Her hand tightened around the control yoke. Every instinct screamed, "You are about to become the only hope for everyone on this plane." And then the co-pilot shouted, his voice urgent, panicked, "Brace for impact." Jessica's hands trembled as she gripped the control yoke, her knuckles white, sweat streaming down her temples. The cockpit smelled of tension, hot metal, and fear. The co-pilot leaned close, his face pale, eyes wide, the lines of panic etched deep. He shouted commands, but Jessica could barely process them. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out the alarms, the roar of the engines, the screams from the cabin. Every instinct screamed at her to panic, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus, to try. The plane tilted sharply to the left, throwing Jessica against the seat. Outside the window, the clouds twisted violently, a gray blur racing toward her. Below, the forested mountains of the Pacific Northwest loomed, green giants that seemed almost alive, ready to swallow the plane whole. She swallowed hard and tried to remember the simulators, the hours she had spent imagining herself in a cockpit, practicing emergency maneuvers. Now it wasn't a game. "Flaps, flaps now," the co-pilot shouted, voice cracking. Jessica reached for the lever, fumbling briefly as the plane jolted again. She moved it forward, feeling the subtle but immediate change in the aircraft's balance. The plane groaned, a deep metallic shriek, and for a moment it seemed as though the fuselage might split apart. She gritted her teeth and focused, ignoring the nausea threatening to overwhelm her. From the cabin came a new wave of screams. Oxygen masks dangled, passengers clinging to each other, praying, screaming, some paralyzed with terror. Jessica glanced briefly toward the windshield. The horizon tipped dangerously. Mountains were closer now, jagged and dark against the gray sky. A river snaked below, the only conceivable landing path if the engines failed completely. The reality of what was happening slammed into her like a physical blow. People's lives rested in her hands. She adjusted the yoke, following the co-pilot's frantic instructions. "Increase throttle, stabilize, use the trim." His voice was sharp, urgent, desperate. Jessica's mind raced, recalling the basic principles of flight she had learned during simulations. She pushed the throttle, nudged the trim, trying to steady the plane. Each adjustment felt like balancing on a knife's edge. Too much, too little, either could mean catastrophe. The captain, sweating and pale, leaned back against the cockpit wall, watching her every move. You might just be our only chance," he muttered, voice tight with tension. Jessica nodded, barely able to speak. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt terrified, inadequate, completely unprepared. Yet somehow a strange clarity kept her moving forward, pushing her through the fear. Another violent lurch shook the plane. The nose dipped suddenly, plunging toward the ground. A collective scream rose from the cabin, sending shivers down her spine. Jessica fought the controls, trying to correct the dive. Her stomach lurched violently as gravity pressed against her chest. She could feel every second stretching, elongated, unbearable. The engine screamed, warning lights blinked frantically, and the metal groaned like a living creature in pain. Hold it steady," the co-pilot shouted. Jessica gritted her teeth, her arms burning as she resisted the tilt. Outside, the mountains rose closer, the trees beneath sharper, more menacing. She could almost see the jagged tops of the evergreens reaching up, ready to shred the plane. Panic clawed at her throat, but she pushed it down. Focus. You can do this. You must. Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently to the right. The cabin tilted, passengers thrown into each other. Oxygen masks swung dangerously, and someone screamed as luggage tumbled down the aisle. Jessica's stomach twisted in terror. A flash of lightning illuminated the clouds outside, turning the cockpit into a strobe-lit nightmare. She swallowed bile and gritted her teeth, forcing herself to ignore the fear. The co-pilot shouted again, pointing to the control panel. "Engines, we're losing thrust. We can't hold altitude." Jessica's mind raced. Losing thrust meant they had precious moments, perhaps seconds, to stabilize or crash. She recalled the simulator techniques, emergency landing procedures, glide ratios, emergency flaps, but nothing prepared her for the visceral reality. The lives of over 100 people, friends, strangers, children, elderly, all depended on her. Jessica adjusted the yoke again, nudging the plane into a gentler glide. The engine screamed, alarms blaring like a chorus of panic. Outside, the mountains loomed larger. She had to act fast. Her hands moved almost automatically, guided by adrenaline, instinct, and memory. She spoke aloud, trying to coordinate with the co-pilot. "Throttle up, trim left, slowly." Her voice shook, but she forced authority into it, knowing hesitation could cost lives. From the cabin came another wave of terror. A mother screamed for her child, a man shouted prayers, a teenager clung to a backpack, rocking back and forth. Jessica felt a pang of guilt and fear. She couldn't fail. Not now, not with everyone depending on her. Her heart pounded as she fought the controls, sweat pouring down her face, her hands slick and trembling. The plane tilted sharply again. For a moment she thought it might tip completely. The co-pilot grabbed the yoke, trying to assist, but Jessica forced him to step back. "This is my moment. I can do this." She felt an almost unnatural calm descend over her as she focused, each movement precise, deliberate, measured. The world outside the cockpit narrowed to a single point. The horizon, the approaching mountains, the tiny sliver of river below. She nudged the controls, corrected the tilt, and slowly, agonizingly, the plane stabilized just enough. Not perfectly, not safely, but enough to prevent an immediate disaster. The cabin continued to shake violently, passengers screaming, crying, praying, but the plane had ceased its uncontrolled dive. Jessica's chest heaved. Her hands ached, her arms burned, and fear still screamed inside her, but a strange, fragile hope emerged. Maybe, just maybe, she could get them out of this. The captain exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief. I don't know how you're doing this, but keep it steady. You might just be our only chance." Jessica nodded, swallowing hard, sweat dripping into her eyes. Then, as if mocking the fragile stability, the plane shuddered violently again. The engines groaned, warning lights blinked furiously, and the fuselage shook. Outside, the horizon seemed to tilt toward them, mountains rising like jagged sentinels. Jessica's stomach dropped. The plane was descending again, too fast. She had to act, and she had to act now. A scream from the cabin pierced the roar of the engines. A child cried. A mother sobbed. The co-pilot shouted instructions, but Jessica's mind felt narrow, focused entirely on the impossible task before her. The plane lurched violently, throwing her back against the seat. Sweat poured down her face. She gritted her teeth, tightened her hands on the yoke, and pushed, pulled, nudged, adjusted. The plane responded slowly, groaning but yielding slightly. It was working, but barely. Jessica took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She had to keep the plane steady, had to prevent it from tipping into the mountains, had to survive. Every second stretched like eternity. Every adjustment counted. And then, through the chaos, she caught sight of it. A thin ribbon of water cutting through the valley below. A river. If she could glide toward it, maybe, just maybe, it could cushion the impact if the engines failed completely. Her heart raced. Time was slipping away. The plane tilted again, violently, almost tipping completely. She forced herself to push, to pull, to stabilize. And in that moment she realized something terrifying. The plane wasn't just fighting the turbulence. Something deeper, mechanical, catastrophic was happening. And the only way to survive might require a choice she wasn't ready to make. The plane groaned violently, a metallic scream that reverberated through every bone in Jessica's body. Outside, clouds swirled in chaotic, storm-tossed patterns, and the mountains loomed ever closer, dark and unyielding. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus, hands gripping the control yoke until her knuckles burned. Every second was a battle, every movement a test. She could feel the engines struggling, warning lights blinking frantically, alarms wailing like a chorus of panic. Behind her, the cabin was descending into chaos. Passengers screamed, clinging to each other or the nearest solid object. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums, dangling from the ceiling, and the smell of fear, mixed with spilled drinks, coffee, and the acrid scent of panic, filled the air. Children wailed, their cries piercing and unrelenting. Adults muttered prayers, some in broken whispers, others shouting names into the void. Jessica's stomach churned violently. She could see a young mother holding her child close, sobbing, whispering that it was going to be okay. She wasn't sure anyone believed it. Across the aisle, a man vomited, the metallic tang sharp and nauseating. Another passenger pressed a hand to his chest, trembling, eyes wide as if trying to memorize every detail before the end. A stewardess moved through the cabin, shouting instructions over the chaos. Her voice was firm, professional, but it wavered. "Remain seated, keep your seatbelts fastened, brace for turbulence." But the words were meaningless amidst the screams, the clanging of falling luggage, and the roar of the struggling engines. Jessica felt a pang of guilt for leaving the cabin, for trying to enter the cockpit, but she knew it was the only chance they had. Lily's hand gripped hers tightly, shaking. "Jessica, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling with terror. Jessica tried to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. There was no easy answer. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't anything routine. This was a disaster, and it was happening right now. Another violent lurch threw passengers into the aisle. Jessica watched as people collided, some falling over seats, others clinging desperately to the floor. Luggage tumbled, trays clattered, and a sharp cry rose from a child who had been knocked from his mother's arms. Jessica's heart ached. Each scream, each tear, each terrified glance reminded her of what was at stake. She could hear the co-pilot shouting behind her, issuing frantic instructions, but she was focused entirely on the controls. Every second mattered. Every movement of the yoke, every adjustment of the throttle could mean the difference between life and death. She fought the plane as it lurched, groaned, and tilted violently. The horizon outside was a chaotic swirl, the mountains closer now than ever, and the river, their only chance, was still too far to reach with confidence. From the cockpit, a low groan of fear echoed. "We can't hold it." The words were almost drowned out by the alarms, but Jessica heard them. She knew the gravity of the situation. They were losing control. Every instinct screamed panic, but she forced herself to remain calm, focusing on what little she could control. The plane tilted sharply again, almost sideways. Passengers screamed as if in a chorus of despair, holding onto anything they could reach. A tray table slammed into a man's head, drawing blood. The metallic taste of fear filled the cabin. Jessica's stomach turned, nausea clawing at her throat, but she ignored it. She had to remain steady, had to keep the plane from tipping completely. "Jessica, listen to me," the co-pilot shouted. "We're losing altitude. We need to stabilize now," or he didn't finish. The plane bucked violently again, throwing him to the side, narrowly missing the dashboard. Jessica's heart raced, every nerve in her body screaming, "This is it. This is the moment." She focused on the river below, the thin ribbon of water that snaked through the valley like a lifeline. She had to guide them there. Every instinct, every memory from her simulator training surged to the forefront of her mind. She adjusted the yoke, nudging the plane into a controlled glide, though it felt like balancing on the edge of a knife. The engines screamed, alarms blared, and the fuselage groaned, but slowly, agonizingly slowly. The descent steadied, just enough to prevent a catastrophic nosedive. Behind her, the cabin continued to shake violently. Passengers screamed, cried, clutched at each other, prayed, sobbed. Jessica could hear Lily whispering over and over, "You're doing it, you're keeping us alive." The words were a fragile tether to sanity amidst the chaos. She forced herself to take another deep breath, to push the fear down, to continue guiding the plane. The plane tilted sharply to the right. Jessica fought the controls with every ounce of strength she had, her arms burning, sweat dripping into her eyes. The mountains were impossibly close now, jagged and merciless, cutting through the gray clouds like knives. A flash of lightning illuminated the cockpit, turning the world outside into a strobe-lit nightmare. She adjusted the throttle, nudged the trim, and tried to level the plane. Slowly, dangerously, it responded, not perfectly, not safely, but enough to prevent a complete disaster for now. A scream from the cabin reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight. She was surrounded by terrified humans, each of them depending on her. A young boy clung to his father's arm, crying. An elderly woman pressed her hands together, whispering prayers she may not have ever said before. A man in the middle row muttered incoherent words, shaking as he looked around at the chaos. Jessica's mind raced. The plane was partially stabilized, but only barely. The engines were still struggling. Every adjustment she made required split-second precision. The river below, their only hope, was still too far, and the mountains threatened to crush them before they could reach it. She glanced at the co-pilot. His face was pale, sweat streaming down his forehead, eyes wide with disbelief. He was no longer giving instructions, only watching, terrified, hoping she could somehow hold it together. Jessica's chest heaved. Every muscle in her body burned, but she forced herself to continue. She had to. She couldn't fail, not now, not ever. Every passenger, every scream, every tear was a reminder of what was at stake. Suddenly, another violent jolt threw her back against the seat. The plane tilted, and a loud metallic screech echoed through the fuselage. Alarms blared, lights flickered. The plane lurched again, dangerously, almost tipping completely. Panic rose in Jessica's chest like a wave, but she forced it down. She focused on the river, on the glide, on the controls. And then, just as she thought she might have a moment of fragile stability, the plane shuddered violently once more. A low rumble echoed through the cabin, deep and ominous. Jessica's stomach dropped. Something was wrong, far worse than she had anticipated. She swallowed hard, gripping the controls with all her strength. The river was close, but the plane was fighting her, struggling against the failing engines, the unrelenting tilt, and the merciless pull of gravity. She could feel the seconds slipping away. If she failed, they would all die. The cabin erupted in a scream that shook her to her core. Oxygen masks swung wildly. Passengers held onto whatever they could, crying, shouting, praying. Jessica's heart raced. She had to act, and she had to act now. Jessica's heart raced like a drum in her chest, each beat echoing the chaos of Flight 227. The plane shuddered violently again, the fuselage groaning like a wounded animal. Her hands ached from gripping the yoke, her arms burned, sweat stinging her eyes. Outside, the mountains rose sharply, jagged and merciless, slicing through the gray clouds. The river, their only potential lifeline, stretched thin below, far away but still within reach if she could guide the plane carefully. She glanced at the captain and co-pilot. Both were pale, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The captain's hands shook as he wiped sweat from his brow. "Jessica, we're losing altitude. The engines won't hold much longer," he muttered, voice tight with tension. We don't have time. You have to decide now." Jessica swallowed hard, trying to force her fear down. She wasn't a trained pilot. She wasn't supposed to be here, controlling the lives of everyone on board. She had only ever touched simulators, gaming programs where mistakes were meaningless. Now, every choice carried weight, real weight. Every second she delayed could mean death. She scanned the cockpit instruments. Red warning lights blinked frantically, alarms screamed. The left engine sputtered, then coughed violently. The right engine groaned. The plane listed dangerously to the left, tilting as if protesting against her efforts. Her mind raced, recalling every detail she had memorized in simulations. Emergency glide, controlled descent, maintain altitude as long as possible. But nothing could prepare anyone for the screaming passengers, the chaos, the real-world terror pressing against her chest like a physical force. From the cabin came another wave of panic. A young mother clutched her child, sobbing. A teenager shouted, praying to a god he had ignored until now. An elderly man muttered something about missed opportunities, wasted life, his voice trembling. Each scream, each tear, each desperate cry made the impossible decision heavier. Jessica looked back at the river below. It was narrow, winding, and flanked by dense forests, but it offered the only chance for survival. Landing on solid ground was impossible. The mountains loomed, the terrain unforgiving. She had a split second to decide: aim for the river and hope for a miracle, or risk the mountains, which were certain death. Her stomach twisted. "We could die, all of us." Lily's hand on hers trembled. "Jessica, please," her voice cracked. Her eyes pleaded, filled with fear, trust, and desperation. Jessica's chest tightened. She couldn't fail. She wouldn't. Not with everyone relying on her. Taking a deep breath, Jessica made the decision. She would guide the plane toward the river. There was no other option. She adjusted the yoke, nudged the throttle, and tried to level the plane as much as possible. Every movement had to be precise, deliberate. One wrong tilt could send them spiraling into the mountains. The engines groaned, alarms blaring, warning lights flashing. The plane lurched violently, almost tipping sideways. Jessica's stomach dropped, fear clawing at her throat. Sweat streamed down her face, mixing with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. She fought to remain calm, to focus on the impossible task ahead. "Steady, steady," she muttered under her breath, guiding the plane toward the river. Outside, the mountains loomed ever closer, dark, jagged, threatening. The trees below seemed to reach for the fuselage, eager to shred it apart. Jessica could feel gravity pulling the plane down, the wind resisting every movement, the engines barely holding on. Another violent lurch threw her forward in her seat. She pressed her foot on the rudder, nudged the yoke, adjusted the throttle. The plane groaned, alarm bells screeched, but slowly, agonizingly, it began to respond. The descent slowed slightly, the tilt lessened, the river drawing nearer. From the co-pilot came a strained, trembling voice. "Jessica, you're doing it, keep it steady." He leaned over to help, but she shook her head. "No, I have to do this myself, I have to." Her voice trembled, but her tone left no room for argument. This was her moment, the only one that mattered. The plane continued its violent glide. The fuselage groaned, wings flexing as if protesting the impossible maneuver. Jessica's vision tunneled, focusing entirely on the river below. The trees on either side seemed to blur, a dangerous forest corridor she had to thread with precision. Panic threatened to rise again, but she forced it down. Calm, focus, one move at a time. Passengers screamed in the cabin. A man yelled, praying, others clutched loved ones. Children cried, oxygen masks dangled. The smell of fear, sweat, and panic filled the air. Jessica's chest tightened. She could feel every heartbeat, every second stretching into eternity. The river below was closer now, narrow, unforgiving, but alive with possibility. Jessica adjusted the plane again, nudging it carefully, delicately. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed. The engines coughed violently, sputtering. She risked a glance at the cockpit panel, fuel levels dangerously low, engine warnings flashing bright red. The plane wasn't going to hold for long. The horizon tilted. Mountains pressed closer on either side. The river below shimmered like a fragile lifeline, reflecting the gray, storm-laden sky. She had only moments to make it work. Her mind flashed with terrifying possibilities. We might crash anyway, we might not make it, but hesitation could guarantee failure. She forced herself to focus. She had to glide them there, smooth and steady, as perfectly as she could. There was no room for doubt. A violent jolt threw the plane again. Passengers screamed. Tray tables toppled, luggage clattered. Oxygen masks swung, children cried, adults yelled. Jessica's stomach lurched violently, nausea clawing at her throat, but she ignored it. She had to survive. They had to survive. Almost there, she whispered, guiding the plane with precision born of terror and adrenaline. Every adjustment counted. Every movement could be the difference between life and death. Then, as the plane dipped slightly, she saw a new threat, a low ridge of jagged rocks jutting into the river corridor. The plane's path was perfect, except for the rocks. One miscalculation, one slight tilt, one engine failure, and they would plummet onto the jagged stones below. Jessica's heart froze. The choice was immediate: risk the rocks or try to correct course and lose altitude. Seconds stretched into eternity, sweat poured into her eyes. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She had to choose. She had to act. Her hands tightened on the yoke. She nudged the plane slightly, banking carefully to avoid the rocks. The engine screamed, groaned, coughed. The fuselage shuddered violently. The plane responded just enough. They were clear of the rocks, but now the river stretched before them, a narrow, unforgiving corridor. Jessica's chest heaved. She had made it past one threat, but survival wasn't guaranteed. The engines were failing. The plane shuddered violently again. The cabin erupted in another wave of terror. Passengers screamed, sobbed, clutched each other. The river shimmered below, thin, twisting, the only path through the disaster. Jessica's mind raced. If I miscalculate, if the engines fail, we're done. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed, but she forced herself to continue. She had to glide them carefully, smoothly, perfectly. The river stretched below, a thin silver ribbon cutting through dense forests, its surface shimmering with an eerie reflection of the stormy sky. Jessica's hands ached, her arms trembling violently from the constant strain on the yoke. Every second, every micro-adjustment mattered. The plane's engines groaned, sputtering, warning lights blinking frantically. She could feel the vibrations running up through the fuselage, the wings flexing under the strain. One misstep now, and the entire plane could plummet into the trees or rocks that flanked the waterway. Almost there, Jessica whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the roar of the failing engines and the chaos of the cabin. She focused on lining the nose of the plane with the river, calculating angles, adjusting throttle, trim, and rudder with precision she hadn't thought possible. Every instinct was stretched to the absolute limit. Behind her, the cabin was a whirlwind of fear. Oxygen masks swung wildly, passengers screamed, and the acrid scent of panic mixed with sweat, spilled coffee, and vomit. Children cried out for their parents. Mothers held them close, whispering prayers that seemed to go unanswered. The co-pilot gritted his teeth, shouting instructions, but mostly watching in awe as Jessica guided the aircraft with a combination of terror-fueled focus and intuition. The mountains on either side of the river rose like jagged sentinels, a reminder of what lay waiting if she miscalculated. Jessica's pulse hammered in her ears. Sweat stung her eyes, but she forced herself to ignore it. She had to stay sharp. Any distraction could be fatal. The river curved ahead, narrowing dangerously between the trees. Jessica adjusted the controls, banking slightly, gliding carefully, trying to slow the descent without stalling the aircraft. The engine sputtered again, groaning in protest. A shudder ran through the plane, but she held it steady. The river was closer now, so close she could see the subtle ripples in the water, the reflection of the storm clouds. "Brace for landing," the captain shouted over the intercom, voice tense but tinged with hope. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. There was no runway, no safety net, only the river and the skill, or luck, required to touch down without disaster. The co-pilot leaned over, voice tense, shouting commands. "Flaps, full flaps, keep it steady. Nose up, nose up." Jessica moved the controls with trembling precision, her arms burning. The plane's descent slowed slightly, the glide steadying, but the river still rushed closer with terrifying speed. From the cabin came a collective scream as the plane dipped suddenly, nearly tipping sideways. Tray tables clattered, passengers screamed, some crying, some praying. Jessica's stomach lurched violently, nausea threatening to overcome her. She forced herself to focus, eyes locked on the water below, hands gripping the yoke, mind racing through calculations she had never been trained to make. The river stretched out, winding like a lifeline through the dense forests. Jessica's fingers shook as she nudged the throttle, adjusted the yoke, keeping the plane level as best she could. The engine sputtered again, warning lights blinking frantically. The co-pilot shouted, guiding her, but mostly just observing, his trust in her growing with each passing second. Jessica felt a strange, surreal calm amidst the chaos. She was terrified, yes, but determination had overtaken panic. She had one chance to get this right, and she was determined to seize it. Every passenger's life depended on her. Every decision mattered. The river widened slightly, but trees crowded its edges like jagged walls. Jessica carefully banked the plane, aligning it with the waterway. The engines groaned, sputtered, and then one cut out entirely, leaving only a terrifying whine from the remaining engine. Panic surged again, but she forced herself to suppress it. She had to glide, had to control, had to survive. She adjusted the controls, nudging the plane gently, guiding it toward the narrow ribbon of water. The fuselage groaned, the wings flexed under the strain. Another jolt sent a ripple of fear through her body, but she refused to let it break her focus. The co-pilot shouted again, voice strained, steady, "Nose up, glide, glide." Jessica complied, every movement precise, calculated. The river drew closer, its surface rippling with the reflection of storm clouds. She could see the trees lining the banks, the rocks jutting out in places. There was no margin for error. The plane descended carefully, inches at a time. She adjusted the throttle, easing the descent, keeping the glide as smooth as possible. The river approached rapidly. She could feel the plane trembling under her touch, the engines protesting. Passengers in the cabin were screaming, crying, holding on. Every sound echoed through the cockpit, every vibration through the fuselage reminding her of the stakes. And then she saw it, a gap in the trees, a stretch of water just wide enough to attempt a landing. Jessica's stomach twisted. There was no time to hesitate. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed, but she had to commit. She pushed the yoke forward slightly, lowering the nose, adjusting the flaps, nudging the throttle. The plane shuddered violently, and for a terrifying moment she thought they would clip the trees. The river rushed beneath them, the gap narrowing with every second. Jessica forced herself to focus entirely on the glide, on the landing, on the impossible task ahead. The engine sputtered again, and then the left engine died entirely, leaving only a fraction of thrust to guide them. She could feel the plane tilting dangerously. The co-pilot shouted, hold it steady." Jessica gritted her teeth, adjusting the yoke, keeping the nose up, and guiding the plane toward the water. The river was almost beneath them now, the banks a jagged threat on either side. The plane dipped, trembling violently. Oxygen masks swung, passengers screamed, children cried. Jessica's heart hammered. One more miscalculation could send them crashing into the trees, the rocks, or the unforgiving riverbanks. Her arms ached, sweat poured into her eyes, but she forced herself to ignore it. The fuselage shuddered as the plane's wheels, or what passed for them in this glide, skimmed the surface of the river. Water sprayed violently, splashing against the fuselage. The plane jolted, nearly tipping, but she forced it level. A cry of terror and hope rose from the cabin as passengers clung to each other, praying, screaming, holding on. The river rushed beneath them, the plane skimming its surface, rocking violently. Jessica adjusted constantly, nudging, gliding, keeping them upright, alive. Every second stretched into eternity. The plane shuddered, then groaned, as if protesting the impossible feat. And then, against all odds, they began to slow. The plane skidded along the river's surface, water spraying violently, engines groaning, fuselage trembling, but they were moving, alive. Jessica forced herself to keep control, guiding the plane toward a straight stretch of river, hopping to maintain momentum without tipping or flipping. The co-pilot's voice was hoarse, strained, filled with awe. "Jessica, you're doing it, keep it steady." The passengers' screams began to shift from terror to disbelief, hope flickering amidst the panic. They clung to each other, bracing, watching as the plane skidded along the water. Jessica's arms burned, her hands a vice on the yoke, her mind razor-sharp despite exhaustion. Every nerve screamed, every instinct guided her movements. They had made it to the river. Now she had to keep them there, alive, upright, intact. The river raced beneath them, a narrow, shimmering ribbon threading through the dense forest. Jessica's arms burned like fire, her hands clamped on the yoke, every muscle screaming in protest. The plane trembled violently with each passing second. Water sprayed against the fuselage as they skidded along the river's surface. Trees loomed dangerously close on both sides, their branches clawing at the fuselage like jagged fingers. The engines had completely died now. The plane was nothing more than a massive, unwieldy glider. Passengers screamed, cried, some whispering prayers, others clutching loved ones in desperate fear. The cabin was chaos incarnate, oxygen masks swinging, luggage tumbling, and the metallic groan of the plane punctuating every shriek. Jessica's chest heaved, her breath ragged, but she forced herself to focus. The river was their only hope, and the end of it would decide everything. She nudged the controls, keeping the plane level as best she could. Each adjustment was infinitesimal but critical. Too far left, and the wing would catch a tree. Too far right, and they'd hit the rocks jutting from the riverbank. Her vision tunneled on the thin path ahead, every instinct honed to razor-sharp precision by sheer terror and adrenaline. The co-pilot leaned close, whispering instructions in short, urgent bursts. "Keep it steady, no sudden movements, glide as smoothly as possible." His voice was strained, almost hoarse, but Jessica barely heard it over the roar of the wind, the river, and the screaming cabin. Her entire being was focused on balance, trajectory, and survival. Ahead, the river widened slightly, offering a fraction more room to maneuver. Jessica felt a flicker of hope. They might actually survive this. But relief was fleeting. Trees loomed along the banks, rocks hidden beneath the surface threatened, and the river current tugged the plane unpredictably. Every second demanded perfection. A sudden jolt nearly threw her forward, and the plane listed dangerously to the left. Water sprayed violently, drenching the cockpit windows, obscuring her vision. Jessica forced herself to correct the tilt, adjusting the rudder, nudging the yoke, praying silently that they wouldn't clip a tree. Behind her, passengers screamed again, some crying, others clutching hands in silent desperation. The river curved sharply ahead. Jessica's stomach dropped. Misjudge this turn and they'd slam into the trees. She forced her hands to remain steady, her mind calculating, estimating distances, angles, speed. The plane groaned and shuddered with each adjustment, a colossal beast resisting the impossible. The co-pilot shouted again, voice strained with urgency. "Almost there. Adjust the nose, keep it from dipping too far." Jessica complied, muscles screaming, sweat pouring into her eyes. She could see the riverbanks edging closer. The current tugged at the plane's fuselage, threatening to spin them into disaster. The plane lurched violently again, a spray of water hitting the windshield, momentarily blinding her. Her heart raced. This is it. One mistake now and we're done. She forced her hands to remain steady, eyes fixed on the gap ahead, every ounce of strength pouring into each movement. Behind her, passengers clung to each other. A mother pressed her child close, whispering assurances she might not have believed. A man muttered prayers under his breath, shaking uncontrollably. Children screamed and cried, some holding hands with strangers in an instinctive grasp for safety. Every sound reminded Jessica why she had to succeed. The river narrowed again. Rocks jutted up from the surface, hidden by turbulent reflections. Trees pressed inward, branches threatening to tear apart the fuselage. Jessica's stomach lurched violently. She adjusted the yoke slightly, nudging the plane left, right, gliding with delicate precision. The plane trembled with every movement, as if resisting her control. The engines were dead. No thrust remained. They were entirely at the mercy of gravity, the river, and her ability to maneuver. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to push it down. Focus. Every movement counts. A branch scraped against the left wing, jolting the plane violently. Screams erupted from the cabin. Jessica's hands shook, but she corrected immediately, nudging the plane back into alignment. Another branch, another scrape, another violent jolt. The river seemed impossibly narrow now, the trees like jagged sentinels on either side, the rocks a hidden threat beneath the surface. The co-pilot's voice was hoarse now, barely audible above the chaos. Just a little further, just a little more. Jessica nodded, silent, teeth gritted, eyes burning with sweat and determination. Ahead she could see a stretch of water that seemed almost calm, a brief opening before the river curved again. It was the last chance to bring them fully under control, the final stretch that could save everyone. Her hands ached, her arms trembled violently, every nerve screaming. One slip now, and it would be over. The plane skimmed the surface of the water, bouncing violently, spraying water into the cockpit. The fuselage groaned, wings flexing dangerously. Jessica adjusted constantly, nudging the controls, maintaining balance, guiding them inch by inch. Every moment stretched into eternity. Passengers screamed, some cheering, some crying, some silent with disbelief. Oxygen masks swayed, luggage tumbled, but miraculously the plane held together. Jessica's chest heaved. They were moving, alive, inching toward the final stretch. Suddenly the plane lurched violently again. The left wing dipped toward the water. Jessica's heart stopped. She fought the yoke with every ounce of strength, muscles burning, sweat stinging her eyes. Trees loomed on the side, rocks beneath. She could feel the plane's fuselage trembling, groaning, straining against the impossible task. Her mind raced. Just a little more, just a little more. She adjusted the yoke again, nudging, gliding, keeping the nose steady, keeping the wings balanced. The river approached the straight stretch. The water beneath them glimmered with hope, and for the first time, Jessica allowed herself to imagine survival. The plane bounced violently again, but she held it. Inches. Inches at a time, the fuselage slid across the water, wings flexing, tremors shaking every part of the aircraft. The passengers clung to whatever they could, screaming, praying, holding each other. The co-pilot's voice trembled with awe and relief. You're going to make it. The trees flanking the riverbank seemed to recede slightly, the rocks no longer threatening. Jessica pushed, nudged, guided. The plane was skimming, sliding, trembling, but under her control. The final stretch was near. She exhaled, forcing herself to remain focused. Almost there. Just a little more, the river widened slightly, the current calmer. The plane glided along the water, bouncing, shaking, trembling, but still moving. Suddenly, a violent jolt threw her against the yoke. Water splashed violently over the cockpit. The fuselage shuddered. The plane tilted dangerously, but Jessica adjusted instantly, muscles screaming, mind razor-sharp. They were moments from survival or disaster. The river stretched ahead, widening slightly, offering a fragile promise of survival. Jessica's arms burned, her hands a vice on the yoke, her eyes stinging with sweat and adrenaline. Every nerve in her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, every heartbeat pounding with fear and determination. The plane groaned, trembled, bounced violently on the surface of the rushing water. Trees loomed dangerously close on both sides, rocks lurked beneath the water, and the engines were silent. A reminder that there was no mechanical assistance left, only her skill and luck. The cabin behind her was chaos incarnate. Passengers screamed, some sobbing, some holding each other in silent terror, others whispering frantic prayers. Oxygen masks swung wildly above their heads, luggage tumbled along the aisles, and the metallic groan of the fuselage underscored every sound. Jessica's chest tightened with the enormity of the responsibility. Every second, every movement mattered. One mistake and everyone, every single soul on Flight 227, could die. Her hands trembled as she nudged the yoke, adjusting the plane's glide. The fuselage quivered with each movement, wings flexing dangerously, but she held it steady, guiding them inch by inch. The river beneath reflected the storm-laden sky in a shimmering silver ribbon. Jessica focused on the narrow path ahead, the only lifeline through the chaos, the only hope to survive the impossible. The co-pilot leaned close, shouting instructions, his voice trembling with strain and awe. "Keep her level, nose steady, almost there." Jessica complied, muscles burning, eyes locked on the water. Each adjustment was critical. Too far to the left and the wing would scrape the trees. Too far to the right and they'd hit hidden rocks. Her mind calculated, instinct guiding her hands faster than thought could follow. A violent jolt threw her forward. Water splashed across the windshield, momentarily obscuring her vision. The fuselage shuddered, wings flexed, and the plane tilted dangerously. She gritted her teeth, corrected immediately, nudging the controls with every ounce of strength she had. Passengers screamed again, a chaotic symphony of terror and hope. A mother clutched her child, whispering reassurances she may not have fully believed. A teenager closed his eyes, muttering prayers, hands pressed tightly together. Jessica's chest tightened at every sound, the weight of their survival pressing down on her like a physical force. The plane bounced violently along the river, but miraculously they were moving forward. The water beneath was turbulent, but for the first time it seemed possible that they could reach the calm stretch ahead. Jessica's mind narrowed to a single point: control, glide, survive. She adjusted the yoke, nudging gently, keeping the wings level, maintaining the glide as best she could. The river widened further. The trees receded slightly, rocks seemed less threatening. Jessica allowed herself a brief, focused breath. Though her hands did not loosen, her eyes did not waver. The plane skidded across the water, bouncing violently, but still intact. Every second, every movement was a delicate negotiation with gravity, momentum, and sheer luck. Another violent jolt rocked the plane. The left wing dipped dangerously. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She fought the yoke with every ounce of strength, correcting immediately. Water sprayed across the cockpit. The fuselage groaned. Behind her, passengers screamed, clutched each other, prayed, cried. Each scream reminded her why she had to succeed. They were counting on her. The co-pilot shouted again, voice hoarse, almost breaking with relief. "Steady, just a little further, you're almost there." Jessica adjusted, nudged, corrected. The plane trembled, bounced, yet slid forward along the river. The widening water offered the first real chance at a landing. The stretch was narrow, but it was enough to survive. Her arms ached, sweat stung her eyes, and adrenaline coursed through her veins like fire. The engines were dead. The fuselage trembled with every bounce, but slowly, painstakingly, she guided Flight 227 toward the final stretch. The plane skimmed the water, wings flexing dangerously, nose steady, wheels, or what passed for them in this glide, just grazing the surface. The river curved slightly ahead, but Jessica calculated carefully, nudged the yoke, and maintained alignment. The plane's tremors were constant reminders of the delicate balance she had to maintain. Each second stretched into eternity. Each adjustment could save or doom them. Passengers' screams began to change. Some gasped in disbelief. Some whispered prayers of thanks. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide, hope flickering amidst the fear. The metallic groan of the fuselage continued, but it was accompanied by a fragile rhythm of survival. Jessica forced herself to focus, muscles screaming, nerves taut. Almost there, keep it steady, glide. She adjusted the yoke once more, nudging the plane slightly, guiding it along the calmest stretch of the river. The plane trembled violently, bounced over minor currents, but slowly she felt it begin to stabilize. A few hundred feet ahead, the riverbank rose gently, a final stretch. Trees still loomed, but now at a safer distance. Rocks were minimal. Jessica could feel that survival was within reach, though one miscalculation could still undo everything. Her arms burned, her hands trembled, but she refused to let go. Passengers screamed, then began to cheer faintly as the plane's glide seemed to stabilize. The water rushed beneath them, but Flight 227 held together. Jessica adjusted gently, nudging, correcting, guiding them toward the riverbank. The plane skidded, trembled, but maintained momentum. The co-pilot shouted, voice raw with relief and disbelief. "You're going to make it, keep it steady." Jessica exhaled, forcing herself to remain focused. The plane skidded closer to the bank. The water calmed. The trees were behind them. The rocks avoided. A final jolt, the fuselage trembling violently, and then the plane touched the riverbank. A rough, violent slide, but it held. The plane shuddered once, twice, then came to a stop. Silence, almost incomprehensible, fell over the cabin. Jessica's hands fell from the yoke, trembling violently. Her chest heaved, lungs gasping. She turned slowly, taking in the cabin. Passengers stared in disbelief, some crying, some laughing, some holding each other in stunned silence. The plane had survived. The co-pilot collapsed into the seat beside her, shaking, tears streaming. I can't. You did it. You saved them all." Jessica's legs gave way and she slumped against the controls, exhausted beyond belief. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt drained, battered, but alive. And more importantly, so were all of the passengers. Passengers began emerging from their seats, some cheering, some sobbing, some hugging strangers. The mother Jessica had seen earlier clutched her child tightly, whispering thanks. A teenager muttered prayers, still trembling. Elderly passengers clung to each other, some still in disbelief. The plane, battered and trembling, had carried them through the impossible. Outside, emergency responders were already racing toward the river, alerted by nearby sightings and distress signals. But Jessica barely noticed. Her mind was focused inward, replaying every second of the flight, the terror, the impossible choices, the near-death moments. Every adjustment, every calculation, every breath had mattered. She exhaled slowly, chest heaving, finally allowing herself to feel the relief. Flight 227 had survived. Against all odds, the impossible had been achieved. And yet, even as passengers celebrated, Jessica remained in the cockpit, hands trembling, mind replaying every jolt, every scream, every near miss. She had survived. They had survived. But the memory of Flight 227, the fear, the chaos, the impossible glide along the river, would stay with her forever.